My substitute pulled the gum from under my desk and asked, "Is this yours?" "Yeah." I stared at her confused because that seemed like a really strange question to ask in the middle of class. "I see," she said. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed between the desks. Her whole body went rigid and started shaking. The teacher's pet was already screaming, "Someone get help!" Kids were screaming and backing away. Ella, this girl I'd been talking to, kept grabbing my arm saying, "What did you do?" Even though all I did was admit the gum was mine. Logan, our class clown, stood there frozen saying, "What the helly?" Someone ran to get the nurse while others crowded around trying to help. I just sat there frozen because what the hell was happening? One second she's asking about gum, and the next she's dying on our classroom floor? The nurse burst in with an EpiPen and jabbed it into Mrs. Pierce's thigh. She was shouting for someone to call 911 and asking what happened, but nobody knew. All I could say was, she asked about my gum, and then this happened. She also said something about the thermostat being too high, some kid added, like right when she walked in. The paramedics arrived in like 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. What did she eat? What did she touch? Does anyone know her allergies? Nobody knew anything because she was a sub we'd never seen before. One paramedic kept asking if she'd been stung by something or if anyone saw her take medication. They checked her arms and neck for bug bites. One of them mentioned her medical bracelet was missing, which seemed weird, but they moved on. I kept saying she just asked about my gum, but he looked at me like I was wasting his time with irrelevant information. They wheeled her out, and her body was still twitching. Ella wouldn't even look at me anymore. Everyone had to leave except me. They made me sit there while they took photos of my desk and the gum under it with gloves on like it was a crime scene. They also bagged up my backpack and took pictures of the whiteboard for some reason. The principal kept asking what I'd eaten for lunch. It seemed like such a weird question when our substitute just almost died, but I told him, PB&J, apple, cookies. He wrote it all down and made a phone call to someone. I heard him say something about liability and get legal on the line. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the principal's office when Mrs. Pierce's daughter showed up. The principal tried to explain what happened, but she cut him off. My mother has a severe peanut allergy. It's in her substitute teacher file. It's supposed to be announced to every class. She turned to glare at me. Did you know that? No, nobody told us anything. She just showed up and started teaching. I don't even know why. You ate peanut butter for lunch, she interrupted. Then you chewed gum. Then you stuck it under your desk, covered in peanut residue. My mother touched it while inspecting your vandalism. Everything clicked into place and I felt sick. This is your fault, she continued. If you hadn't been vandalizing school property, my mother wouldn't be in the ICU right now. We're going to sue you and your family for everything. I stood up because I was done being blamed for something I couldn't have predicted. How was I supposed to know your mom would go around touching random gum under desks? That's gross. And nobody told us about her allergy. The principal jumped in before it could escalate more, but the damage was done. I was suspended. My mom had to pick me up early, and the whole ride home I kept thinking about how insane this was. That night, I was lying in bed brain rotting when my phone started blowing up. Like notification after notification. Logan texted, "Yo, check your Instagram." Someone posted a video of you laughing after Mrs. Pierce collapsed. It looks really bad, dude. I opened Instagram and there it was. A video from someone's story, already reposted by half the school. It showed me sitting at my desk, right after Mrs. Pierce hit the floor. In the chaos, Logan had made some dumb joke, and I'd given this nervous half laugh. But in the video, with no context, it looked like I was smiling while she was dying. The caption read, "This psycho really poisoned a teacher and laughed about it." The comments were even worse. People calling me a monster, saying I did it on purpose. Someone found my mom's Facebook. My address was in the replies. I tried to delete my account, but screenshots were already everywhere. That's when my mom called. She was talking so fast I could barely understand her over my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Lock your door right now, and don't open it for anyone but me or Dad." Her voice was shaking, which scared me more than anything. Someone posted our address online and I already called 911 because people are making threats. I jumped up and turned the lock on my bedroom door while she kept talking. "The police are sending a patrol car to check our street, but stay away from the windows." My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the phone. Outside, I heard car doors slamming, and when I peeked through my blinds, I saw our neighbors standing in their driveways, looking at their phones, and then looking at our house. Mom burst into my room with her spare key, and Dad was right behind her, pulling all my curtains closed. "We need to stay back from the windows until the police get here." Dad was checking the locks on everything while Mom sat next to me on my bed, holding my hand so tight it hurt. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times before we heard someone announce they were police. Dad went downstairs to let them in while Mom stayed with me, and we could hear voices, but not what they were saying. The officer came upstairs and took notes about the doxing and showed us screenshots people had sent of the death threats. "We'll increase patrols tonight, but you should consider staying somewhere else." He looked tired and kept checking his radio. Mom was already pulling my duffel bag from the closet and throwing clothes in, while Dad grabbed my laptop and charger. We went out through the garage and took back roads to avoid main streets where someone might be watching for our car. Mom's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with texts from family, asking if we were okay, and messages from numbers she didn't recognize calling her terrible things. The drive to my aunt's house 2 towns over felt like it took forever, even though it was only 40 minutes. Nobody talked except when Dad would point out a turn, or Mom would delete another voicemail without listening to it. My aunt was waiting on her porch and rushed us inside like we were running from a storm. She'd already made up the guest room and kept asking if we needed anything, but all I wanted was for this to stop. That night I couldn't sleep at all and just laid there refreshing Instagram and Twitter, watching everything get worse. The video had over 200,000 views, and someone made a TikTok putting dramatic music behind it that made me look like a complete psycho. People were making memes about me being a peanut killer, and someone photoshopped my school photo onto a wanted poster. My eyes burned from staring at my phone, but I couldn't stop checking to see how bad it was getting. The next morning, the principal called Mom's phone and she put it on speaker, so we could all hear. "Your son is not allowed on the school property pending a formal disciplinary hearing scheduled for next week." His voice was all official and cold. "We've had to add extra security because parents are showing up demanding he be expelled immediately." Mom started arguing about how I hadn't done anything wrong, but he cut her off saying it was for everyone's safety, including mine. After she hung up, she started Googling lawyers and found Candace Abbott, who specialized in student defense cases. Her website said she'd handled cases of wrongful suspension, and we drove to her office that afternoon. She was younger than I expected, with short hair and glasses that she kept pushing up while taking notes about everything. This could escalate to criminal charges if the family pushes hard enough, but right now, we focus on the school issue. She explained about discovery and evidence and how we needed to document everything. On the drive back, we went past our house to grab more clothes, and that's when we saw it. Someone had spray-painted Peanut Killer across our garage door in red paint that was still dripping. Mom started crying, and Dad pulled over to call the police again, while I just sat there feeling nothing. Our neighbors were pretending not to stare, but I could see them peeking through their curtains and taking pictures with their phones. The cop who came said they'd add it to the report, but graffiti was hard to prosecute without witnesses or cameras. Dad spent an hour trying to scrub it off, but you could still see the outline of the letters. Back at my aunt's house, Candace was already working and sent preservation letters to the school district and all the social media platforms. "We need them to save everything, including deleted posts and private messages, because this is our evidence." She explained that the narrative was already set against us online, but the legal system worked on facts, not mob opinion. That evening, my aunt called us into the living room where the local news was on. They were doing a segment about what they called the Peanut Incident, without saying my name, but showing enough details that everyone would know. The reporter stood outside my school interviewing parents who were calling for accountability and justice for Mrs. Pierce. One mom was crying, saying she couldn't believe the school would let such a dangerous student back on campus. They showed Mrs. Pierce's daughter's GoFundMe page and talked about her medical bills and how she might have permanent damage from oxygen loss. The anchor ended by saying the district was reviewing their policies and taking the matter very seriously. I wanted to throw up watching them make me into a monster when all I did was chew gum after lunch. I grabbed my phone to text some of my friends about what was happening, but most of them left me on read or just sent back one-word answers like crazy or wow, which hurt more than if they'd just ignored me completely. Skeptical. I wonder why Mrs. Pierce didn't announce her allergy when she walked in if it was that serious. Something feels odd about her touching random gum under desks. What substitute teacher does that on their first day? Here. Logan was the only one who actually replied with more than a few words, texting back that he knew I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But his parents were telling him to stay away from me for now, because they didn't want him getting dragged into the mess. The next morning, Candace called to say she'd scheduled a meeting with the school district's legal team for that afternoon, and wanted us to come to her office first to prepare. We drove there in silence, and she had this huge binder on her desk, filled with printed policies and procedures that she'd been going through all night. She showed us the part where it said in bold letters that all substitute teachers with severe allergies must have their condition announced to each class at the start of the period, which obviously never happened with Mrs. Pierce. The meeting with the district people were in this cold conference room, and they had 3 lawyers there, plus some administrator I'd never seen before, who kept taking notes on everything we said. Candace pushed them hard on the policy violation, but they kept saying that even if the announcement wasn't made, I still shouldn't have been vandalizing school property with gum, which made me want to scream, because literally everyone sticks gum under desks sometimes. 3 days into hiding at my aunt's house, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw people sharing posts from an account called Peanut Killer Confessions that was pretending to be me and posting fake confessions about how I'd been planning to poison teachers for months. The posts were so obviously fake with bad grammar and crazy stuff about wanting to hurt people, but tons of kids from the school were sharing them like they were real evidence that I was some kind of psycho. I reported the account, but Instagram said it didn't violate their guidelines, which made no sense since someone was literally pretending to be me and making up crimes I didn't commit. Mom had to call her boss that same morning because reporters kept showing up at her office asking for comments and trying to get photos of her walking to her car. Her boss put her on paid leave to assess the situation, which we all knew meant they were deciding if having the mom of the peanut killer was too much bad publicity for their company. She cried in the bathroom after the call, and I could hear her through the door, even though she was trying to be quiet about it. Candace decided we needed to fight back with actual evidence, so she hired a private investigator to look into who posted the original video and track down the metadata to prove it was edited. The investigator was this older guy who used to be a cop, and he said he'd seen plenty of cases where social media mobs got the story completely wrong, but by the time the truth came out, nobody cared anymore. Later that day, the guidance counselor from the school called my mom's phone, asking to talk to me about keeping up with my schoolwork while I was suspended. Janie Rivera sounded nice enough, but you could tell she was being super careful with her words, saying she could email my assignments, but warning that I'd still need to come in person to take any major tests, which seemed impossible with how everyone at the school hated me now. The next morning, we woke up to find a patrol car parked right outside my aunt's house because someone had posted her address online too, with a caption about harboring a attempted murderer, which was insane since Mrs. Pierce wasn't even dead. The cop knocked on the door to let us know they were taking the threat seriously, but admitted there wasn't much they could do about online harassment unless someone made a specific threat with a time and place, which seemed like waiting for something bad to actually happen. Dad had to meet with our insurance company that afternoon about what would happen if Mrs. Pierce's family decided to sue us personally instead of just the school district. The agent kept talking about liability limits and coverage exclusions, explaining that our homeowner's policy might cover some legal fees, but not if I was found criminally liable for intentional harm, which made Dad's face go white because we didn't have money for a huge lawsuit. 2 days later, Candace called with some good news for once, because she'd gotten copies of the cafeteria security footage from lunch that day, showing me washing my hands at the sink after eating my sandwich and before I even chewed the gum. She said it proved I didn't deliberately contaminate anything, but warned that the court of public opinion didn't care about evidence when they'd already decided I was guilty based on that edited video. That night, I was lying in bed reading comments on a news article about the incident when my chest started getting really tight and I couldn't catch my breath properly. My hands were shaking so bad, I dropped my phone and I felt like I was having a heart attack or dying or something, so I stumbled to my mom's room, barely able to talk. She drove me to urgent care where the doctor said I was having a panic attack from all the stress and prescribed anxiety medication, while recommending we find a therapist immediately to help me deal with everything that was happening. The next morning, Candace called while I was still in bed and told me to check my email, because Roy Parrish from the school district had sent something we needed to discuss. I opened my laptop and found this long email basically saying I was completely responsible for what happened because sticking gum under desks was vandalism, and if I hadn't vandalized school property, none of this would have happened. He went on for 3 paragraphs about how the district had zero tolerance for property damage and how my actions directly caused a medical emergency that could have been fatal. Candace had already replied and copied me on it, pointing out that the district failed to follow their own written policy about announcing substitute teacher allergies to every class, and that this failure was the actual cause of the incident. She attached screenshots of their policy manual and highlighted the exact section that said all severe allergies must be announced at the start of each class period when a substitute is present. Roy shot back within an hour, saying that students are still responsible for maintaining school property, and that my vandalism created the hazardous condition regardless of notification failures. While this email war was happening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that just said, "Check your DMs on Discord." I almost ignored it. But something made me look, and there was a message from Parker Schultz, this quiet kid from AV Club who I'd maybe talked to twice in my whole life. He said he had the original unedited footage from our classroom that day because he'd been testing a new camera for the morning announcements and left it recording by accident. He was scared to get involved publicly because he didn't want people coming after him too, but said he'd share it with Candace if we promised to keep his name out of everything. I forwarded his message to Candace, and she set up a meeting at a coffee shop where Parker showed up wearing sunglasses and a hoodie like he was in some spy movie. He handed her a flash drive and left without ordering anything, just mumbling that he hoped it helped, before basically running out the door. 2 days later, Candace scheduled an appointment with Dr. Khalid Irwin, this allergist she found who specialized in severe reactions, and we drove 40 minutes to his office where he spent an hour explaining how peanut allergies actually work. He showed us charts and studies about how heat and stress can make reactions worse, and how even tiny amounts of peanut protein can trigger anaphylaxis in extremely sensitive people. He walked us through how someone could have a reaction from touching dried saliva with peanut residue even hours after the contamination happened, and agreed to write a detailed report explaining that the reaction could have occurred even with minimal exposure. On the drive back, my mom got a call from my aunt who was crying and could barely talk because she'd gone to get the mail and found a dead squirrel in her mailbox with a note that said, "You're next," written in red marker. We drove straight there, and the cops were already taking photos and bagging everything for evidence. But the officer taking the report said it was probably just teenagers trying to be edgy, and there wasn't much they could do unless someone made a more specific threat. My aunt was shaking so bad she couldn't hold her coffee cup steady and kept asking why people would do this when she hadn't done anything wrong except let us stay with her. Candace decided we needed to fight back against the worst online harassers, so she filed defamation lawsuits against 3 people who'd been posting the most extreme stuff, like saying I tried to murder Mrs. Pierce on purpose and sharing our addresses with violent suggestions about what should happen to us. She explained that we probably wouldn't win all of them, but it might scare other people into backing off if they saw we were taking legal action against the worst offenders. The private investigator she'd hired called that same week with interesting news about the edited video that started everything. He traced the metadata and IP addresses and found that it came from a student who wasn't even in our classroom when everything happened. This kid had taken Logan's original footage from his story, cut out the parts that showed context, like Logan making the joke that made me laugh nervously, added the inflammatory caption about me poisoning a teacher, and laughing about it, then posted it from a burner account before sharing it to the main school gossip page. The investigator had screenshots of everything, including the editing software history, on the kid's computer, which his parents had let the investigator check after he explained the legal situation they might be facing. Curious. The way Parker showed up with sunglasses and a hoodie to secretly share that footage makes me wonder what else he might have accidentally recorded that day. Did his camera catch something before the gum incident too? Here. I started seeing a therapist twice a week at this place downtown that specialized in trauma from public shaming and online harassment. She taught me breathing exercises to do when I felt my chest getting tight and helped me work through the guilt I felt, even though logically, I knew the reaction wasn't something I could have predicted or prevented. She had me write down my thoughts in a journal, which felt stupid at first, but actually helped me see how my brain was spiraling into worst-case scenarios that weren't even realistic. During our second week of sessions, she had me practice responses for when I eventually had to go back to the school and face everyone who thought I was a monster. 3 weeks into everything, Mrs. Pierce's daughter went on some podcast about education safety and spent 40 minutes talking about her mother's condition and how the school system had failed to protect substitute teachers from preventable hazards. She never said my name directly, but described the situation with enough detail that anyone could figure out who she meant, calling the student involved reckless and destructive, and saying the incident showed how little respect kids today have for authority figures. The podcast got shared thousands of times with people commenting about how kids these days are out of control and need harsher punishments for even minor rule breaking. Candace was furious when she heard it and started preparing a cease and desist letter, but decided to hold off when her investigator found something even more important. He'd gotten maintenance records from the school through a public information request and discovered they hadn't cleaned gum from under desks in over 2 months, even though their policy required weekly deep cleaning of all classroom surfaces. There were work orders showing the cleaning staff had been cut in half due to budget issues, and they were only doing floors and whiteboards, skipping everything else unless there was a specific complaint. After a week at my aunt's house, we finally got to go home, but it was worse than we expected. Our house had been egged so many times that the smell was awful even from the street, and someone had taken a baseball bat to our mailbox, which was completely smashed. Dad spent the rest of the day installing security cameras, while Mom sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, researching homeschooling options and crying when she thought I wasn't looking. The next morning, Candace called saying we needed to meet at the district office for something important. When we got there, the principal was already sitting with the substitute coordinator and some district people I didn't recognize. Candace hit record on her phone and placed it on the table, while the principal shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and started reading from a paper about how the substitute coordinator had failed to check Mrs. Pierce's file that morning, which meant nobody told our class about her severe peanut allergy. The coordinator kept trying to interrupt, but the principal just kept reading about protocol failures and missed safety checks. Candace leaned over and whispered that this admission changed everything about who was liable for what happened. 2 days later, Parker texted me saying he had something I needed to see. We met at a Starbucks where he pulled out his laptop and showed me footage from 3 different phones that kids had been recording when everything went down. The videos showed Mrs. Pierce going desk to desk during her inspection, touching at least 3 different pieces of gum stuck under various desks, not just mine. Parker had timestamps showing she touched 2 other desks before she even got to mine. He'd sent the footage to some lab his uncle worked at, and they said they couldn't determine which piece or pieces had peanut residue, or even when any of the gum was placed there since some looked weeks old. Candace released all this evidence to the news stations the next week. The local news ran a segment about the school's failures with a reporter standing outside the district office talking about safety protocols. The comments online started shifting slightly, with some people saying maybe I wasn't totally to blame if the school never announced the allergy. Most people still hated me, though, calling me careless and saying I should have known better than to put gum under desks regardless. 3 weeks later, I had to give a deposition at some law office downtown. The court reporter set up her machine, while Mrs. Pierce's lawyer shuffled through papers giving me dirty looks. For 3 hours, he asked me about every single detail from that day, trying to make me look careless and destructive. He kept asking leading questions about whether I enjoyed breaking rules or if I thought vandalism was funny. Candace kept objecting and telling me not to answer when he got too aggressive. He made me describe exactly how I chewed the gum, where I stuck it, whether I thought about germs, whether I'd ever been disciplined before. Mom went back to work the following Monday, but came home crying the first day. She said people whispered when she walked by and conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Her friend from accounting told her that everyone had seen the news and some people thought she raised me wrong. Mom started eating lunch in her car after that, sitting in the parking lot with her sandwich rather than dealing with the break room where people would go silent when she walked in. The school board called an emergency meeting about allergy policies that Thursday night. The auditorium was packed with angry parents demanding better protections for their kids. Some woman stood up and started yelling about how I should never be allowed back in any school ever, even though that wasn't what the meeting was supposed to be about. Other parents joined in saying I was dangerous, and their kids didn't feel safe with me around. The board members kept trying to redirect to policy discussion, but people just wanted to complain about me. That weekend, I got a DM from Ella on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. She apologized for how she'd acted and explained that right after the incident, the administration had told all students to avoid me for their own safety. She said she knew I wasn't a monster, but she was still scared to be seen talking to me because other kids might turn on her too. She wished me luck, but said she couldn't risk being my friend right now. The next week, everything shifted when the district's insurance company got involved. Roy suddenly became way less aggressive in his emails to Candace. The insurance people had looked at all the evidence and realized the district had massive legal exposure from failing to follow their own allergy protocols. They wanted to settle quickly before it became an even bigger lawsuit that could cost them millions. Candace said they were scared of the precedent it might set for other allergy cases. We got an update about Mrs. Pierce through her daughter's social media posts. She was finally out of the ICU, but facing months of recovery and ongoing health issues from the severe reaction. Her daughter posted asking for GoFundMe donations for medical bills and lost wages since Mrs. Pierce couldn't work. The fundraiser hit $50,000 in 2 days, with people commenting about how awful the whole situation was and how Mrs. Pierce deserved justice. Candace spent the next 2 weeks negotiating with the district about me returning to the school. They wanted me gone, but legally couldn't expel me for an accident that was partially their fault. She worked out a modified schedule where I'd have to check in with security every morning, eat lunch in the counselor's office away from other students, and couldn't participate in any group activities or clubs. I'd basically be at the school, but completely isolated from everyone else for my own safety and theirs. 3 weeks later, the detective showed up at our house with paperwork, saying they were closing the criminal investigation. He sat at our kitchen table drinking the coffee Mom made and went through all the evidence they'd collected. The lab tests on the gum showed peanut residue, but also traces from at least 5 other students who'd touched those desks over the past 2 months. He pulled out photos of the classroom showing gum stuck under 12 different desks, some of it so old it had turned black. The security footage from the hallway showed Mrs. Pierce entering the room already looking flushed and complaining about the heat before she ever touched anything. He said there was zero evidence I'd done anything on purpose, and even if I had known about her allergy, sticking gum under a desk wasn't attempted murder. Before he left, he told my parents he'd seen what social media could do to innocent people, and he was sorry we were going through this. 5 weeks after everything happened, I walked back through the school's front doors with my head down while everyone in the hallway stopped talking to stare at me. The security guard met me at the entrance and walked me to my first class, standing outside the door like I was some kind of prisoner. Kids moved away from me in the halls and whispered behind their hands. Someone had written "killer" on my locker in permanent marker that maintenance hadn't fully scrubbed off yet. The guard followed me to every single class, waiting outside each door and then walking me to the next one. At the water fountain, kids backed away and let me go first, not out of respect, but because they didn't want to be near me. My math teacher barely looked at me when I walked in and pointed to a desk in the back corner away from everyone else. She kept her distance the whole class, never coming near my desk when she walked around checking homework. My history teacher made me sit by the door and kept glancing at me nervously every few minutes like I might snap. Skeptical. Something's not adding up here. The school suddenly finding those maintenance records showing they hadn't cleaned gum for 2 months feels awfully convenient timing for their liability concerns. Plus, Mrs. Pierce touching multiple desks with old gum, but only mine getting blamed. Here, chemistry was the worst, because the teacher made this big announcement about lab safety and allergies while staring directly at me the whole time. Only my English teacher treated me normal, and after class, she quietly told me she knew what it was like to be blamed for something that wasn't really your fault. She didn't say anything else, but that small kindness meant everything when everyone else acted like I had some disease. At lunch, the security guard walked me to the counselor's office, where I had to eat alone at a small table by the window. Logan showed up with his lunch tray and sat down across from me, even though he wasn't supposed to be there. The counselor started to tell him to leave, but he said he had permission from the principal to keep me company. He joked that at least we got air conditioning and didn't have to deal with the nasty cafeteria smell. We played cards while we ate, and he caught me up on all the drama I'd missed, carefully avoiding any mention of the incident. His loyalty, when literally everyone else had abandoned me, meant more than I could ever tell him. That same week, the kid who'd edited and posted the video got suspended for cyberbullying, but people online treated him like some kind of hero. He did 3 different podcast interviews playing victim, saying the school was punishing him for exposing the truth about what really happened. His GoFundMe for legal fees raised $8,000 in 2 days. People commented that he was brave for standing up to the system and protecting other students from dangerous people like me. He posted screenshots of his suspension letter with crying emojis and got 50,000 likes. 2 days later, Candace called with huge news that Mrs. Pierce's daughter was dropping the personal lawsuit against me and my family. Her lawyer had reviewed all the evidence Candace collected, including the school's admission that they never announced the allergy and the proof that multiple pieces of gum had been under those desks for months. Instead, she was focusing on suing the district for negligence, since their insurance company would have to pay for that. Candace said this was the best possible outcome for us, since the district had deep pockets, and we didn't. Mom cried with relief when she heard we wouldn't lose our house. The next school board meeting turned into chaos when a group of parents presented a petition to have me expelled with over 500 signatures. They stood up one by one saying their kids didn't feel safe with me in the building and demanding the board take action. The board president kept explaining that they couldn't legally expel someone for an accident, especially when the investigation proved the school shared responsibility for not following their own safety protocols. One dad got so angry he had to be escorted out by security when he started yelling that I was getting away with attempted murder. The petition got posted online and gathered another 1,000 signatures from people who didn't even live in our district. To get away from all the hate, I started volunteering at a food bank 30 minutes away where nobody knew who I was. The coordinator just saw me as another high school kid trying to get community service hours for college applications. I sorted canned goods and packed boxes for 3 hours every Saturday morning, feeling useful for the first time in months. The other volunteers were mostly older people who didn't use social media and just talked to me about normal stuff like sports and weather. It felt amazing to be treated like a regular person instead of some monster. Parker started hanging out with me after school, teaching me about digital security and helping me lock down what was left of my online presence. He showed me how to use VPNs and create anonymous accounts for when I needed to research stuff for school. We sat in his basement going through privacy settings and removing any traces of my real name from search results. He admitted that he'd been bullied badly in middle school and knew how it felt when everyone turned against you. He helped me set up new email addresses and showed me how to monitor if anyone was trying to dox me again. The district announced new allergy protocols the following week, including bright red wristbands that substitutes with severe allergies had to wear, and mandatory announcements that had to be read in every single class. They called it the Pierce Protocol, which felt like a knife in my gut every time I heard it. Teachers now had to check a special app every morning that listed any allergies in the building. The janitors had to remove gum from under desks every single Friday with special tools and gloves. Parents praised the new safety measures at the next board meeting, while shooting dirty looks at me sitting in the back row with my mom. 3 months passed before they finally let me walk through school without security following me around. I kept my head down in the hallways and counted the tiles while walking to class. Kids still whispered when I passed, but at least they stopped throwing things at my locker. Some guy made a peanut joke during lunch when the teacher stepped out. I just kept eating my sandwich and stared at my phone until he got bored and walked away. The worst part was feeling everyone watching me even when they weren't. I'd catch myself checking over my shoulder between every class. Mom's boss called her into his office after Candace sent over all the evidence proving I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He actually apologized for putting her on leave and gave her back pay for the time she missed. She came home that night with Chinese takeout for the first time in months. Her hands still shook when she opened the containers, but she was trying to act normal. She told me her coworkers were being nicer now, but I could tell she was still hurt by how fast they'd turned on us. The guidance counselor called me in during study hall to talk about college applications. She handed me an acceptance letter from a school 2 states away that came to the office. My hands got sweaty opening it, because this was my chance to start over somewhere nobody knew me. The letter said I was accepted for next fall with a partial scholarship for my essay about overcoming adversity. I decided right then to use my middle name, James, on everything from now on. Candace met us at her office the next week to file paperwork for a legal name change. She suggested changing the spelling slightly from my first name, so Google searches wouldn't immediately connect me to all the news articles. We changed one letter and added another so it looked different, but sounded almost the same when you said it out loud. The whole process would take 6 weeks, but she said it was worth it for a fresh start. Mrs. Pierce's lawyer sent Candace a message saying his client had returned to substitute teaching at a different district. They had special protocols now where she wore a bright red bracelet, and every class got told about her allergy before she entered. Her daughter wanted us to know through the lawyers that her mother didn't blame me personally. She understood it was an accident, but she couldn't forgive the situation itself. Candace said this was actually good news because it meant they weren't coming after us anymore. The district's insurance company finally settled with Mrs. Pierce's family for $200,000. They also agreed to do allergy training for all staff every single year. The janitors had to deep clean under every desk once a month with special equipment now. They banned gum completely, which made a bunch of kids mad at me, even though they didn't know the real reason. The principal announced it as a hygiene issue, but everyone figured out it was because of what happened. I became the reason nobody could chew gum anymore. Graduation day came faster than I expected. I stood in line with my cap and gown, feeling like everyone was staring, even though most people had moved on. When they called my name, I walked across the stage to polite clapping instead of the boos I expected. Logan stood up and cheered really loud from the audience. A few other kids joined in, which made me realize some people had actually forgiven me. My mom took pictures with tears running down her face. The guidance counselor made me write 2 different college essays over the summer. The first one talked about learning to live with public shame and dealing with unintended consequences. She said it was powerful and showed real growth. Then she told me to write a backup essay that didn't mention the incident at all. She explained that admissions officers might Google me and get scared off by all the old news articles. The second essay was boring and talked about volunteering at the food bank instead. I got a job at a warehouse 40 minutes from home where nobody recognized me. The manager just saw another kid needing summer work before college. I loaded boxes onto trucks for 8 hours a day in the heat. My coworkers were mostly older guys who didn't care about social media drama. Being anonymous felt amazing after months of everyone knowing my face. I ate lunch alone in my car and listened to music. Nobody whispered or took pictures or made peanut jokes. For 8 hours a day, I was just James who worked in shipping. Parker came over one night to help me set up new social media accounts for college. We used my middle name and a nickname version that nobody would connect to my real identity. He showed me how to lock everything down with privacy settings. We joked that it was like witness protection for suburban kids. He understood because he'd been through his own problems with online harassment in middle school. He helped me create new email addresses and showed me apps for managing multiple identities online. Moving day arrived at the end of August. Mom helped me pack everything into our car for the drive to college. She kept finding excuses to come back to my room for things we'd already packed. Dad loaded the car 3 different times trying to fit everything perfectly. Curious. Parker, teaching him all those privacy tricks really shows how much thought went into protecting his identity. Did Parker learn all that stuff from his own bad experiences in middle school? Here. The drive took 6 hours, and Mom cried for the first 2. She kept reaching over to squeeze my hand at red lights. When we got to campus, she helped me unload everything into my dorm room. My roommate wasn't there yet, which gave us time alone. She sat on my new bed and started crying again. She pulled me into a hug and whispered that she was proud of how I handled everything. She said most kids would have given up or done something stupid, but I kept going. She was crying because I survived something that could have destroyed me. Dad helped carry the last box up to my room, and then they both stood there, not wanting to leave. My roommate showed up an hour later, dragging 2 suitcases and looking just as nervous as me. His name was Leighton, and he was from 3 states away studying computer science. We spent that first night setting up our gaming systems and ordering pizza from this place that delivered until 2 a.m. He asked about my high school, and I just said it was boring and changed the subject. We played Call of Duty until 4 a.m., and he never asked why I didn't have any social media or why my phone never buzzed with texts from friends back home. The next few weeks, we fell into this routine of classes during the day and gaming at night. Leighton introduced me to his friends from the engineering dorm, and suddenly I had this whole group who knew nothing about what happened. They called me by my middle name because that's how I introduced myself, and nobody ever questioned it. I declared my major as public health during sophomore year after taking this intro class about food safety systems. The professor kept talking about institutional failures and prevention protocols, and I found myself taking notes like my life depended on it. My advisor noticed I always sat in the front row and asked tons of questions about allergy management. She said she'd never seen an undergraduate so passionate about something most students found boring. I started working in her research lab cataloging data about allergic reactions in schools. She kept commenting on how thorough my work was and how I caught patterns other students missed. Spring break junior year, Logan drove 14 hours to visit me. We went to this dive bar near campus where nobody cared that our IDs were sketchy and just talked about everything except the obvious. He told me about kids from our high school who'd gotten arrested for drugs or pregnant or dropped out. Some parents still brought up my name when complaining about kids these days at the school board meetings. He said the new principal made every teacher read their substitute's medical file out loud before letting them in the classroom. We laughed about how insane senior year was and how we both ended up okay despite everything. He crashed on my dorm floor for 3 days, and it felt like having a real friend again. The dining services director asked me to join their allergy committee after my advisor recommended me. I spent hours reviewing their protocols and suggesting changes based on everything I'd learned the hard way. The director kept asking where I got such detailed knowledge about cross-contamination and emergency response procedures. I wrote up a 20-page report about preventing allergic reactions through better communication systems. They implemented almost all my suggestions, and the director said I should consider consulting work after graduation. I applied to graduate programs focusing on public health policy and got into 3 good schools. My thesis advisor read my application essay about institutional responsibility in health crises and called it remarkably mature for someone my age. She said most students didn't understand the real-world implications of policy failures until much later in their careers. I started working on research about how schools and institutions handle medical emergencies. 2 years into grad school, I got a LinkedIn notification that made my stomach drop. Ella had found my profile and sent a connection request with a long message. She said she'd been following my work in public health and wanted to apologize again for how she'd acted. She told me she'd spent years correcting people when they brought up the story and trying to explain how the internet mob got everything wrong. She was working as a teacher now and made sure to always check medical files for every substitute. We exchanged a few messages, and she mentioned she used my case as an example when training new teachers about allergy awareness. After finishing my master's, I got hired by a nonprofit that develops safety programs for schools. My boss had no idea about my history and just saw someone with tons of knowledge about allergy protocols and emergency response. I traveled to different districts, helping them set up better systems for managing student and staff allergies. Every protocol I wrote might prevent another kid from going through what I did. I never mentioned my personal connection, but sometimes administrators would comment on how realistic my scenarios seemed. 5 years had passed when I proposed to Sarah, this girl I met at a conference about public health policy. She knew my whole story because I'd told her on our 4th date, and she'd just held my hand and said everyone deserves a second chance. The wedding was small, just family and close friends at this venue near the mountains. Logan flew in to be my best man and spent the whole bachelor party telling stories about how we'd survived high school together. During the reception, he gave this speech about loyalty and standing by friends when the whole world turns against them. He didn't mention the incident directly, but talked about how real friendship means showing up when things get hard, not just when they're easy. He said he knew from that first day freshman year that I was someone worth keeping around, even when everyone else said otherwise. Sarah's family had no idea what he meant, but my mom was crying and Dad kept patting my shoulder. The DJ played terrible music, and my aunt got too drunk, and Leighton caught the bouquet even though he wasn't supposed to be in that group. I stood there watching everyone dance and realized the worst thing that ever happened to me had also shown me exactly who really mattered and what I wanted to do with my life. Well, that was definitely a journey to share with you all. Kinda makes you look at things a little differently, right? Thanks for sticking around with me. Like the video, it helps more than you think.